Robert Ray joins me now on what he makes of all of this and whether or not President Trump should sit down with Mueller. And it's good to see you, Robert. The reason I mention that is because all of these indictments that we're seeing so far coming out of the special counsel's office have nothing to do with what the mandate was supposed to do, which is collusion.
Right. And those investigations and prosecutions would appear to have independent merit, separate and apart from whatever, if anything, they have to say about Russia collusion.
Right. So all this conversation about Michael Cohen this and Michael Cohen that and, Paul Manafort that, it all has nothing to do with Donald Trump. That's what you don't hear in the mainstream media.
And this has gone on now for, 15 months?
Exactly.
I have said for some time that a prosecutor has about 18 months or so to show results, and then public sentiment tends to get exhausted with the investigation, and it's time to bring it to a conclusion, which is, by the way, what the president has called for.
So what do you think? You think that he is going to come to a conclusion, show us his report on Russian meddling already, the special counsel, that is?
Well, I had hoped that that would be done before the midterm elections, and it seems unlikely at this point that that will happen. I mean, maybe we'll be surprised and it will come in before then, but the thing that's sort of hanging over this, of course, is the ongoing negotiations about whether or not the president will or will not sit for an interview and the terms under which that would be done.
I'm shocked at this, that we're continuing to talk about whether or not the president's going to sit down with Robert Mueller. You say go slow. Now is not the time. Why?
Well, because I think there's a clock on these investigations, and, past experience has shown in connection with independent counsel and special counsel investigations that one successful strategy is just sort of wait it out until its conclusion. And it may well be the president, could submit to an interview. Why would he give an interview with regard to things like obstruction, where I think he has reason to conclude, based upon advice of his lawyers, that he hasn't obstructed justice, that no obstruction case could be made? Why would you submit to an interview and subject yourself to a prosecution for perjury and or false statements by giving answers in connection with obstruction-related questions?
Right.
So he's not going to do that. If he waits it out, I think he awaits the results of the midterms, and then it becomes really a political question as to what happens next. The president could choose at that point to shut down the investigation on the assumption that the Republicans maintain control of Congress. And even if the House changes hands to the Democrats, he may decide to shut down the investigation in any event and, sort of ride out the question about whether or not the Democrats would actually pursue impeachment articles.
But isn't this issue of whether or not the president's going to sit down with Mueller in and of itself sort of noise that's continuing and keeping this whole idea alive? I mean, why doesn't Giuliani just come out and say, no, the president's not sitting down with you, Robert Mueller?
I think he wants to show, and I think the president also shows his willingness to actually, meet this investigation halfway. I think he does so at his peril with regard to the advice that he's being given relative to, don't do anything to make things worse. Don't submit to an interview where you potentially put yourself in legal jeopardy. I do think he wants to, consistent with public sentiment, at least provide the appearance that he's willing to cooperate with Mueller's investigators and submit to an interview so long as it's on reasonable terms. It seems like those terms are, I'll answer questions with regard to why the investigation was commissioned, i.e., Russia collusion. If you want to start to turn this into an obstruction inquiry, I think that's the water's edge where the president is pushed back, and appropriately so, to say, listen, that's not a place I'm prepared to go. I don't know whether those negotiations will bear fruit, and I certainly don't know whether or not they'll bear fruit before the midterm elections. So,
because we don't know where this investigation is going. Look at all of the indictments so far on Russians who will never be actually stepping foot in a U.S. courtroom.
You're right about that.
Okay, 13 Russians that we'll never see them again. So that was sort of just to say, oh, yeah, I found out that they were, in fact, meddling, and we're indicting them, even though it means nothing for the U.S. You've got other charges for Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort that have nothing to do with the president. So if you know that none of this has anything to do with what you thought, why would he sit down?
I think that's right, which is why, his best course, it seems to me, politically and legally, is to just simply ride out the storm and let this thing come to a natural conclusion. I thought originally months ago that he might have to agree to an interview in order to quicken the end of the investigation.
Well, that makes sense, yeah.
I don't think that that's in the cards. I think, again, we're already, by election day, we'll be 18 months into this investigation, and I suspect that it won't go on much longer after that. I mean, ultimately, where do I think this thing, lands?
Yeah.
It lands with a report to Congress. That's where it lands.
Yeah. We'll see when that report comes out. A lot riding on these midterm elections, Robert.
I think that's right,
Huge.
yes.
All right. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Robert Ray joining us there.